Hello to all and welcome to the first webinar of the Social Finance Program on review of DC projects with a social finance component, inventory results and overview from the field. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Yusra Hamid and I'm your moderator for this webinar. Just before we start, let me talk about two things. The first one is what is this webinar new system that we are all using now, and the second one is a quick overview of the profile of the participants in this webinar. So for the webinar system, yes, here, we have all, you can see a chat box like that one, where you can play around. So here you can hide or unhide your control panel. Here there's a chat box where you can type questions to us even during the presentations. But please let us know if your question is intended to a particular panelist or to anyone. Make sure to press this button here, send questions to staff, so that we receive your questions and comments. You'll see that this name, Jasmine Suministrado, Jasmine is our colleague from the facility and she will be managing the question and queuing them up for the panelists to answer. We will consolidate questions and comments and address as many of them during the questions and answer part. Also, we'll launch several polls. This is a funny thing, so it will be good if you can participate by clicking on the answers on your screen. So, who is with us today? Who are the participants? So we have 34 attendees, 34 colleagues have registered, and their profiles are quite diverse. So by region, we have a majority from headquarters, then 29% from Africa, and 19% from Asia Pacific. We have also 7% colleagues from Latin America that wake up really early today, and a couple of colleagues from Arab State and also from Turin. If we see the breakdown by category, we have 25 project staff, either CTAs or other colleagues working in the project, so they are more from the implementing side. And we have 75% technical specialists that are much more on the backstopping edge, either technical specialists or also program officers. They are also in this chart. So the work of the webinar attendees is linked to the three sectors of ILO work out of 4: social protection, employment, and standards. And a third of our attendees are social finance network members. So quite diversified profiles indeed, diversified areas of expertise and level of involvement in projects. We hope to hear a rich mix of questions and comments during the Q&A part. And now let me introduce you to the panelists of today. We'll be hearing many voices and I think as many accents. So a couple of offices down the corridor from my office in Geneva, we will have Craig Churchill, Acting Chief of the Social Finance Program. He'll be introducing social finance theme and the background of the inventory of technical cooperation projects in the ILO. Then we'll have Gustavo Propellecci, who has worked with us as an external consultant on the analysis of the products of hundreds of TC projects. He's kind enough to still talk to us actually. He's addressing us from Geneva to share the results of the inventory. We will as well have regional illustration from Africa and Asia. For the Africa part, we'll have Judith Van Dorn, social finance expert in the Africa Regional Office, and she'll be addressing us from Addis. For the Asia part, we have two colleagues, Valérie Breda, social finance expert in the Decent Work team for East and Southeast Asia, based in Bangkok, and Hideki Kagohashi, enterprise development specialist of the Decent Work team in ILO New Delhi, India, and a social finance network member. So now I'm turning to Craig, who will set the scene for our today webinar. Craig, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Yusra. So just a couple of background information. One is, how does social finance fit into the ILO? One of the things that we find throughout the organization is that a lot of different departments and units use social finance tools, products, services, policies in order to promote different aspects of the decent work agenda. So whether it's trying to prevent child labor or whether it's trying to promote small enterprise development, the social finance really runs the gamut across the organization. And because it's a tool that's used by many different parts of the organization, the social finance program is set up as a focal point intended to provide guidance, support to colleagues on how to use social finance effectively. One of the things that we find is that it's not super sophisticated, but it's a technical area that it's important that for the ILO's own reputation, that it's used in a way that doesn't damage the ILO's reputation, and also helps to contribute to achieving the objectives that each of the departments have in trying to use social finance interventions. So the ILO is a part of CGAP, the Consultative Group to Assist the Poor, which is a member donor consortium housed at the World Bank, and CGAP provides support to its members in order to assess their effectiveness, try to harmonize donor policies. And in that process, they did a review of the ILO, analyzing how social finance, or their angle is microfinance, is used by the ILO. And one of the recommendations out of their analysis is that we have a better handle on how social finance is used throughout the organization and better way of monitoring and tracking the results. And so based on that recommendation, we brought Gustavo on board to do an analysis of all the project documents he could find and see which ones had social finance components. And so it's the results of that study that he's going to be sharing with us today. And the whole purpose behind it is really so we have a better idea of what's out there as a starting point, and then the next steps would be, well, what do we do about it? How do we improve the use of social finance as a tool for achieving the ILO's objectives?
So Gustavo, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Yusra. Thanks, Craig. Welcome, everyone. Let's start checking the results of the inventory, but before that, and not to make it boring, I need your participation, so I will start with a question that will allow us to understand why we are all in front of our computers right now. So I'm opening now a poll that you will need to answer. And as you will see on your screen, you need to tell me why you're attending this webinar. Is it to know more about the results of the social finance inventory? Is it to reflect on how it would be possible to improve general practices of social finance within ILO? Or is it because both of these reasons? So I need you to click on your answer, and we will have the results shortly as soon as the poll is closed. I hope you're all voting. So in 10 seconds, the poll should be closing, and we will share the results. Please vote. And it should be closed now, yes. So 64% of you are saying that you are here because of both reasons, so that's great, because that's actually what we are going to do. And let's start checking the results. And when looking at the social finance inventory, first it's important to tell something about the methodology. It was carried out from March until June this year. It involved reviewing 653 technical cooperations, And an important thing is that it focused only on active technical cooperations at the moment of the analysis. So projects that had ended before this date were not contemplated. The analysis was based on the products attached to the iris, where we could gather information from the programs. And a very important point is that we were not looking at the evaluations, but just at these products. The rationale, as you can see on the slide, was to have a more accurate knowledge on all the active technical cooperations that were using at that time social finance component in their projects. So, once a technical cooperation was identified to contain a social finance component, what I needed to do was to categorize the information that was found. And that meant each technical cooperation, I needed to decide which category of intervention it was, which component or theme of intervention, which was the type of intervention, and which were the clients this technical cooperation was aimed to. This involved direct clients and final clients, and last, the level of social finance intervention. Don't worry about all these variables, because we will go through them through the quantitative results. This might seem a little bit confusing, so I will give you a clear example so that you can put this in concrete terms. For example, there was a technical cooperation I found in Peru by Enterprise, and it was about the promotion of employment and MSEs for youth employment and management of juvenile labor migration. The category of intervention was financial policies. They wanted to manage labor migration and provide technical assistance to MSEs. This goal was supposed to be reached through two components, remittances and financial policies, which translated in an intervention that included outcomes as public management of international migration and framework for the promotion of youth, micro and small enterprises. The idea was to foster the channeling and productive use of remittances for micro enterprises as well as SMEs of youth and women. So when it came to see which type of intervention was this, we decided that it was policy formulation was one of the types of the intervention, and the other one was capacity building. So before sharing the results of the inventory, I will make another poll just to keep you awake, and let's see what is your guess on the frequency of projects with a social finance component among technical cooperations in the ILO. So we will open now the second poll, and the question is, according to you, what is the percentage of technical cooperation projects within ILO portfolio of projects that have a social finance component? I will give you some seconds to vote. So I hope you are all voting now. Let's close it in 5 seconds. It should be closing now, and the results is that 55% of you think that 25% of the technical cooperations we analyzed had a social finance component, and 27% of you think that 30%. And actually you are quite right, because we will see that we found 161 technical cooperations actually had a social finance component identified, and that is exactly 25% of the total. That means that 55% of you were right. We'll look now at the geographical distribution, and you will see that Africa, with 78 technical cooperations, was the region with more technical cooperations with social finance component, followed by Asia and the Pacific, then by the Inter-American region, by Arab states, and last the European and Central Asia area. Also, we found 25 projects that had a global geographical scope. But before jumping into the next result, I will make the third poll, and I hope you're not bored by this poll, but I think it's quite nice to know what you think. So before jumping into which are the technical units more relevant and showing you the results, I want to know, and I'm opening now the third poll, according to you, what would be the two technical units and themes that use more social finance in its project? You are able to tick two choices between social finance program, IPEC, MSU, SID, and crisis. And next to it you have the theme that they approach through their technical cooperations. I'll give you 5 more seconds. Okay, and the results, it should be closing now, and the results are okay. So yeah, we have quite some diversity here. Many of you think that social finance is the leading technical unit using technical cooperation with social finance components, but actually it is not, and we will see the results. When we look at the ILO units administrating the technical cooperations, we see that it's IPEC, the one that leads the use of social finance in their technical cooperation, followed by SID, then by Enterprise, by MSU, and then by ILO Crisis. As you can see here, social finance only has 11 technical cooperations that of course use social finance component, but it's quite surprising to see that the broad use of IPEC by social finance. And you can also see that it's quite interesting that it's used by many departments and also in all 4 sectors of the ILO, declaration, dialogue, ILO 8, SECSOC, and others. Let's continue, move to the results. Let's analyze the main characteristics of the interventions. Just a short comment is that access to financial service is the main category of intervention, but let's see what happened now with theme of intervention. As you can see in the chart, the triangle between microcredit, financial linkages, and microfinance is by far the most common and the most typical intervention. This is basically, to put it in concrete terms, access to financial services through linkages with financial institutions. Then we see different types of interventions. Here, for example, we see microinsurance. This is an intervention that was basically done only by SFP. Then we have, for example, remittances, and this was carried out by migrant. As it's seen, there are many different themes, but the concentrations on the first items of the list, microcredit, financial linkages, and microfinance, is quite striking. Let's move to the type of intervention. So the disaggregated information here shows the absolute predominance of capacity building. The 64% we see here is as the main type of intervention. But if we add the secondary type of intervention, we see that capacity building is nearly 80% of the total interventions. And it refers not just to facilitating the access to financial resources for the target population of the project, but also to every sort of activity that links clients with financial schemes. This could be entrepreneurship skills, training, financial linkages, etc. Then we see another type of intervention, like policy advice, that is mainly linked with remittances, and, for example, policy formulation that is used by many units. Let's continue moving, and now let's talk a little bit about the clients. So what we call clients is who is the technical cooperation aimed to, and of course we need to divide this between direct clients and final clients. It's very clear to see that the ILO tripartite constituents or the governments alone are by far the most common direct client at which technical cooperations are aimed to. However, when it comes to final clients, it is very interesting to see there is a broad diversity, and we have youth, women, family of child labor, self-entrepreneurs, and migrant family. This will allow us to reflect now how broad could be the scope of the use of social finance interventions. Another quantitative funding that I think is very relevant, probably one of the most important, is which is the level of social finance intervention. This means at which level we found the social finance component within the technical cooperation. An interesting reflection here is that as the level of intervention becomes less important, the technical cooperations found for each level increases. That is why we see that most of the interventions are only at the level of activity and only a few are at the level of objective. And of course, at the level of objective are mainly the social finance program interventions. The interventions at outcome or output level are equally distributed among many units, and because IPEC is the one that has more interventions, it's also the one that has more presence in outcomes, outputs, and activity levels. So this was a little bit the quantitative analysis of some of the findings. This was much longer, but I don't want to bore you so much. So before examining the most relevant units interventions, I think it's important to highlight four main justifications for the use of social finance. That was seen across all the interventions, and it was there were actually four of them, and this was the provision of different economic alternatives was the main one. But then there was something very interesting. Almost all the technical corporations that decide to use social finance justify the use of this tool because it's sustainable, and that's an advantage over different strategies that they could have chosen for their interventions. It is also highlighted that it is a strategy which impacts and the results that it can achieve exceeds the implementation period of the technical cooperation. And of course, a more pragmatical one is that there is a big lack of funding for entrepreneurial activities, and social finance can cover this, and it can do it in a sustainable way. So let's move to some more concrete examples, and let's check the results of the five most relevant units that are IPEC, SEED, MSU, Enterprise, and Crisis. The relevance here I need to tell that is just because they have more technical cooperations using social finance, not because they are more important than others. So we see some generalities among them. The first one is that access to financial services is the main category of intervention. Of course, this is mainly partnership with microfinance institutions, but it also involves linkages with public programs of microcredit and the creation of credit and saving groups. The other generality that I found was that the use of a pragmatic approach to restart business and generate new ones through sustainable schemes was the main justification of the use of social finance by these five units. And the interventions, as I mentioned before, it was not just access to credit, but also financial literacy, remittances, and generation of knowledge. The other common finding was that social finance was seen as a tool for economic integration of different marginalized groups that are what I called before direct final clients. Sorry. Let's look at some small results for each of these units. So we see that, for example, in IPEC, the justification for the use of social finance was to promote a viable alternative to child labor through the promotion of new income generation activities. In the case of SEED and Enterprise, social finance was seen as a reliable source of funding for enterprise creation. In the case of MSU, social finance was a means to facilitate the economic integration of the youth, and of course, in terms of clients, they only target the youth. And in the case of Crisis, the use of social finance was seen as the best way to promote or restart economic activities as a means to guarantee livelihood strategies for affected population, and they include a broad set of clients. So the analysis of all this information allows us to draw some conclusions regarding what is being done and to try to identify what we can call good practices and also learn some lessons for the future. So first, I think it is necessary to highlight that there is a broad set of tools that could be used, and there are common practice in the access to finance strategies. These are interventions that can be used, and they are much diversified. This could be access to credit, but also savings or guarantee funds or micro-leasing, for example. And the way to go about it is through the use of a broad set of methodologies. These methodologies, as I said before, the most common probably was linkages with the microfinance institutions, but it could also be research or policy advice, or training activities. But this is what can be done with social finance. Let's see what the ILO is doing with the social finance, and what are especially these technical cooperation projects doing with social finance. So here what we see is that more than 85% of the total interventions by ILO units are about access to financial services, and this is mainly credit for enterprise creation through financial linkages. So it is quite striking the concentration on the same type of intervention. Of course, it's important to highlight that some interventions were more general about the environment, on how to develop financial services for the poor, or how to make them more effective. And it is also possible to find some interventions focused on different tools, as I was mentioned before. For example, the migrant unit and the enterprise unit have projects with remittances for migrant workers. The MSU units have many projects regarding the development of youth funds, to channel funds to foster entrepreneurial activities by the youth. And for example, SEED had some technical cooperations focusing on the creation of financial products and mechanisms for ecological producers that face basically a lack of funding for their activities. And many units aiming to combine access to financial services with financial educations had activities in this regard. But not to bore you with the theory, let's take 5 minutes to shed light on Africa, on an African case to illustrate this 85%, but also to have the experience from a social finance field expert that is usually in contact with first-hand projects. So I let the floor to Judy.
Okay, thank you, Gustavo. I would like to welcome everybody from Africa, and I see that we are, after headquarters, the largest representation with 29%. Thank you very much, and especially also for taking time available to sit with us here in this webinar. So many of you may know me already. I am the microfinance person in the regional office for Africa, and I can assist any of you if you have any technical question or if you need any advice on the social finance issue in your project. And I want to share you some experiences of what I have found on the ground. Firstly, social finance is often being perceived as credit, and it's often used then for enterprise development. This is not only in the ILO how people look at social finance, it's even outside. But if you look at it from this perspective, it's quite limited, because you can only use a limited number of instruments, which is credit, for a limited number of objectives. But there's also other ways of looking at social finance. So you can have, for example, savings or insurance and use it to reduce the vulnerabilities of people. So for example, if there's an emergency at the household level, if somebody dies or if there's a fire and the business burns down, it is very useful to have savings or insurance so that the persons will not become in the, let's say, a debt trap or, you know, financial crisis. And the ILO, like Gustavo has said, has worked a lot on this, but it has been mainly the microinsurance facility and the social finance program, and this approach is not very common in other departments in the ILO. Another way of looking at social finance is also to empower people through training them, so through providing financial literacy. And this is also often overlooked. Yet it's very interesting because it's a way to empower people to make better use of the money they have and to protect them to fall into a debt trap. You know, some products and some loans can be too costly or just not suited for that person with that level of income. So there's a risk that people become indebted. And we have seen examples of that in the developed world as well as in the developing world. So this is a very topical issue. And this is something that we in social finance are putting more focus on. Now let's move on, because these are some conceptual issues, but let's move on to some practical examples. So some common approaches that I have seen in ILO projects here in Africa. First of all, there's the project management issues. So the social finance program can assist you, but often we are not approached, definitely not in the design phase. So usually when anybody starts implementing a project, and usually by the time the financial component has to be implemented, that is where the social finance program is then approached. This is usually a time where people are in a hurry, they have to show results, they have to spend money, and this is not a time where you really sit and think about a strategy. You're under pressure and you have to show results. So in this type of situation, some essential steps are often being skipped. So for example, assessments are often not being done. So there's not really a mapping of what do people need, which institutions are available, what services are available. So we often work on the basis of assumptions. And another thing that often doesn't happen is there will not be a very good screening of partners with whom we can work. So this is a challenge, and this is what we would recommend you to approach us in the early stage, you know, design stage or early implementation of the project. also, some people don't know that we are available, so they would not approach us for any support. And then thirdly, many people have prefixed ideas about what social finance is in line with good practice. I have heard really many colleagues saying that they don't want to work with the more professional, sustainable financial institutions because they charge high interest rates and they have big offices and it's too costly to lend from them. But I think that many people are not familiar with what costs are involved in lending to poor people. So if people understand that better, they also understand why the interest rate will be higher. Also the issue of sustainability comes up, because maybe you can offer an interest rate that is low, but maybe you're not offering a sustainable access to finance. So sometimes the sustainability of the project is compromised. Now, some examples, some practical examples, is that what we have seen is that the selection of financial partners is not always done on the basis of good practice, and also that sometimes different goals are being combined. So for example, sometimes we want to provide access to finance for the target group, but we also want at the same time to build community organizations. So we may want to work with a community organization that is not very professional, and that community organization will then lend to the target group, for example, youth. So we try to achieve two objectives, but this may mean that the organization is not providing sustainable access to the youth, and in the long run it will be a waste of resources. We have seen an example like this here in Africa, and this is something that we would really try to stay away from. We really encourage to work with a sustainable organization, a professional organization, so that the long-term access to finance will also be available. Another example which we have seen is that when grants are being provided for on-lending, there are some administrative issues. So for example, if the project has $90,000 to spend and it wants to give a grant for on-lending, according to us it would be good to provide that larger amount to one organization that is already quite professional. Yet we have the waiver issue. So if you want to spend more money than 30,000, you need to get a waiver. And when you're under time pressure, you don't want to go through that process. So then sometimes colleagues are inclined to maybe give 3 grants for on-lending to 3 organizations to just speed up the whole process. And this again is not in line with the good practices that we see, and so this is something that we would not recommend. So again, it's an argument for having early planning and work really on the basis of good practices. Now, I have mentioned some challenges because I think we can learn from them, but there are also many good practices, and many organizations or many colleagues that approach us really in time, really at the design phase of the project. Some colleagues even budget some work months to compensate for social finance for the time that we are investing in advising colleagues. Yet what I find is that this is often done on an ad hoc basis, and it's basically done on the basis of personal relations and not really based on an ILO office policy. So now, having said that, I will hand over the floor.
Thanks, Judith. It's again my turn. I'm Gustavo, in case you don't recognize my voice. Just one comment, so we make a good practice on the use of the webinar. I would encourage you to use the chat box on your right to write any questions or comments you might have, because we are able to use it as we are giving the presentation, and then we can answer the questions right away after the presentation. So feel free to write any comment or question there. But now let's look at the good practices by some relevant units. We will present 2 cases touching on 2 technical areas, child labor by IPEC, and Valerie will share with us some good practices on youth employment. So let's start with the IPEC project. It is a technical cooperation in the African region that is titled Towards Child Labor-Free Cocoa Growing Communities in Ivory Coast and Ghana through an Integrated Area-Based Approach. So when I was looking at the product of this intervention, I saw an outcome that was targeted households in cocoa growing communities will have enhanced sustainable livelihoods. So then I was looking for the social finance specific mention, and I found this at the output level, and it was the research and implementation of appropriate microfinance savings, skills, trainings, and entrepreneurship strategies for target households. And when I was looking at the logical framework of these projects, I found all the activities included to achieve this output. And some of them were to map existing institutions, to make value chain analysis, to assess needs and interests for microfinance in the communities, and also the provision, for example, of technical assistance and financial education schemes. So some interesting facts about this good practice and why we call it a good practice. First is that the product included a long list of activities to select the proper partners for this project. And this would assure a responsible practice by the microfinance institution selected, and also a right monitoring of clients and ongoing support. It also included 2 clear indicators to be measured by the project. The first one was the number of microfinance institutions that were extending services to the targeted population, and the second one was the number of households accessing credit. And the last but not least is that SFP was involved in the writing of this product, so this might be why the project was so well developed, and this is just my interpretation of it. Just as a comment, that this project also included a project implementation timeline, which I found quite striking. It was one of the few projects of the 161 found that it was so clearly organized, and each activity had a clear implementation date. The second case is a youth employment case by MSU that the project was identified during the inventory as a good practice, but I will let the floor to Valerie to present the details of this case.
Good morning. Thank you, Gustavo. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for those who are in Asia, like me. Thank you very much for being online with us for this seminar. I would like to share with you the case, a very practical case of the Job for Peace program in Nepal. I was involved in this project as the social finance expert for Asia and the Pacific. As you know, SFP is based in Geneva, obviously, and SFP is supported by regional experts, Judith in Addis for Africa, and you heard Judith just before, and myself in Bangkok for Asia and the Pacific. In addition, SFP has focal points in most ILO offices worldwide, thanks to the Social Finance Network. Now let's see how SFP collaborated with this project in Nepal. As you see on the slide, the project had the very ambitious objective to engage 12,500 youth in productive activities in 2 conflict-affected areas of Nepal. It was a very complex project with 7 components, including employment-intensive infrastructure, skills, entrepreneurships, cooperatives, youth empowerment, and access to finance. When the project started in 2009, the team was very busy setting up and implementing the various components, as you can imagine. And when it came to the finance, to the access to finance components, the initial design was not really matching the context anymore, and it was very difficult to implement it in a very short time. On top of that, the project had limited expertise on social finance. There were delays in the implementation, and the donor was pushing for delivery, like it happens very often. In short, the project team did not have a clue how to move the social finance component forward. That's actually when we came into the picture. Hideki Kagohashi, the enterprise development specialist based in Delhi and member of the Social Finance Network, was backstopping this project and recommended the team to seek our assistance. We conducted a mission to Nepal to kickstart market mapping and help the team to redesign the social finance component. The market mapping looked at the financial service providers available in the areas and the products offered, but also at the youth needs for social finance services. The results of this mapping helped us to define new outputs and activities for the components. So we came up with 3 subcomponents. The first one promote the development of financial products adapted to the needs of the youth. The second one, to enhance financial literacy of youth. And the third one, to facilitate financial linkages between skills and BDS providers and partner MFIs to ease youth access to finance. How did we do that practically? For the first subcomponent, we supported the project to select 3 partner microfinance banks and 3 saving and credit cooperatives. We organized an exchange visit to a leading MFI in India. A few weeks later, a training workshop on product diversification was delivered in collaboration with Turin. After that, the 6 MFIs developed products such as youth savings, mobile financial services, and started to pilot test these products just before the end of the project. For the second one on financial literacy, I helped the project to adapt one of our training materials on financial education. I facilitated a TOT for the 6 partner MFIs, and in turn, the partner MFIs trained over 1,500 clients. By the end of the project, 1,300 youth had started to save or had increased their saving. Some of them even used their saving to start a business rather than taking a loan. For the third subcomponent, the project facilitated 2 workshops gathering BDS, skills providers, and MFIs, and we provided technical advice. As a result, 200 youth were able to take a loan to start or improve their business. This component has met its objectives, but perhaps more importantly, the partner MFIs have committed to roll out the new products in all their branches if the pilot test is successful, and also to mainstream financial education in their operations, meaning that they will be able to reach many more youth in the country. What made it work? What made this component successful? One of the most important factors is that the project approached us. It did so a bit late, I must say, only 10 months before the expected end of the project, meaning that for us in Geneva and in Bangkok, it has a little bit like a rescue mission, and more time would have been necessary to reach better results. So please, I would like to repeat again, don't wait for your project to go through PARDEF to contact us, as we see quite often actually. Don't wait for your project to start or to be midway until it's end. Contact us when you design the project at the very beginning. It leads me to the second factor, that is a close collaboration with Hideki, who is a member of the Social Finance Network. Hideki has been very helpful, linking us not only with this project in Nepal, but also with other projects in South Asia, such as in Bangladesh and in India. SFP was also very responsive to support this project in Nepal, and we were able to allocate time for mission and backstopping on a very short notice. We do commit to be responsive to your request in the future, so please feel free to contact us. Another factor that contributed to the success of this project, of the social finance component, is the use of SFP tools and networks. We have many different tools and training materials that were already mentioned before, but I would like to mention again that we have this material on topics such as microfinance management, guarantee funds, microinsurance, micro-leasing, financial education, village banking. We also have, as I mentioned before, experts and focal points in Geneva and in the regional and the country offices. Another crucial factor is that the project had a good financial allocation for this social finance component. To give you an idea, the budget for the whole project was $1.8 million, and $200,000 were allocated to this social finance component. So if you plan to have a social finance component in your project, don't forget to make financial provisions for it. Plan not only for the activities, but also for the consultants and for the ILO experts who will help you to do it well. As a final word, I would like to encourage you again to contact us whenever you need any support on social finance issues. Please do not hesitate to link with me in Bangkok, to link with my colleagues in Addis and in Geneva. This comes to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to interacting with you in the future in social finance. Gustavo, back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valerie. That was great. And thanks to all of you, because we are starting to receive some very interesting questions on our chat box. I encourage you to do more of them. So as we saw, and we continue talking about the results, we saw two good practices, and there were a few more. I remember one of SEED in Peru, one of crisis in Iraq, apart from this one of IPEC and the one of youth employment that Valerie explained to us. But, however, on the dark side, as Judith and Valerie mentioned, was that all the technical cooperations did not seem to be good practices. Basically, at analyzing the products, I found two main problems. The first one was that the information provided was very, very limited in some cases, and this led to the second problem, that with this information it was very difficult for me to assess the feasibility of a good intervention. Therefore, not knowing how well developed was the project. I will give you some brief examples of some products that I would claim didn't seem to be good practices, at least at the writing level of the product. So, for example, IPEC has two programs, one in Syria and one in Haiti, where the output was that the quality of the life of the selected families would improve after the technical cooperation, and include as an activity the facilitation of access to income generation programs, as well as vocational training and credit schemes. Now, which was the problem for me? First of all, that there were no indicators specified in the product of how we will assure that the facilitation of access to income generation programs would be done, and especially that it was assumed that the access to credit would generate a positive impact on their lives. Another thing I can mention is that there was no mention to other financial products that could have been more useful in this case. In the case of Enterprise and SEED, they had two programs in Africa, one regarding youth and the other one regarding SMEs. And both technical cooperations state that microfinance institutions were very important partners in the implementation. But there was a big problem for me in these products. That is, there was no information about the mapping of local institutions. So there is a need to carefully investigate the extent and the nature of if there is such a thing, of the gap between demand and supply of financial services. If we do this, we will be able to determine how a project could bridge the gap and with which intermediaries we could make partnerships to go about it. For example, these projects had no information on how the microfinance institutions will be selected to assure that they were the right partner. And from an efficiency and sustainable point of view, it is always better to strengthen an existing institution than to create new ones. In terms of further sustainability, this product also didn't mention anything to guarantee the continuity of the project once the technical cooperation was finished. And the last case I can mention is a case by CEPOL in Palestine. The idea was to strengthen entrepreneurship culture in the private sector. And there was a specific activity that was about the institutional capacity for the provision of business developing services. Then this included the access to credit, especially for youth and women. However, in the whole product, there were no references at all on how this project was going to be implemented, and as I mentioned before, no possible links or studies about what was happening with local microfinance institutions that could do this job. So because the information on the products was very limited, I was only able to formulate hypotheses on the shortcomings of the projects. As I mentioned in the beginning of the presentations, no evaluation reports were included in this analysis, so no information about the real implementation outputs was analyzed by me. I will be turning to Hideki later to illustrate these not such good practices with a field perspective, and he will give us an overview of the myths that have contributed to these not so good practices. But before doing that, I think it's important for me to highlight some conclusions of the general findings of this inventory. So the main one is that social finance is indeed a very popular tool across the ILO units. It it's true, the vast majority of intervention focus on access to financial services through the financial linkages with financial providers. So here a question that I posed before is, are we missing the potential of different financial tools that, at least from my perspective as a consultant, I didn't see that the units were really using much more than access to credit, despite some examples. And the thing is that the broad use of financial services was justified as an important tool for a variety of issues: entrepreneurship development, post-crisis situation, prevention and eradication of child labor, holding communities together. So last but not least, I think an important premise that I need to tell you and to share the message is that we believe that it is better not to do microfinance than to do it wrong. And this means thinking social finance is the right intervention first. If so, then it requires a realistic program design, a careful selection of partners, and a clear timeline and budget for its execution. Now the floor will be yours, Hideki, for the yellow cards that might lay the ground for shortcomings in the design of social finance interventions.
Hideki? Hideki, do you hear us? Hideki, we see your PowerPoint, but we don't hear you.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay,
Yes.
I was muted. Okay, well, again, thank you, Gustavo, and hello, everyone. You have seen the success in Nepal. Actually, it was a big success. Valerie sounded rather modest, but it was quite a big success with a better than expected contribution to job creation. Thanks a lot for your technical support, Valerie. Now, after seeing the success, you will hear challenges in South Asia. I also would like to echo the points made by colleagues earlier. The social finance is not just microcredit. It's about making financial system work for the poor. During my 5 years in South Asia, I have encountered many well-intended but technically questionable, sometimes counterproductive ideas around job creation and its link to finance, both within the ILO and outside. Because it's so frequent, I'd like to share with you the most frequently encountered ideas as yellow card ideas. You know, because of the multidisciplinary nature of the ILO agendas and the compounded nature of the problem on the ground, no one has perfect understanding of all the technical issue areas and how each of them may be linked or should be linked. But is it all right? Well, when it comes to finance, I think it is not quite all right. I tend to think the finance is like strong medicine. If we use it right, strong medicine creates visible improvements. If we misuse it, strong medicine puts us in danger. So we better consult with doctor before taking them. And let's be even extra careful when we combine it with other drugs. You know what I mean. Now, the 10 yellow card ideas. The audience, everyone, I'm going to ask you a question about after you see all the 10 cards, so please listen carefully. Here is a list of the 10 yellow card ideas I have encountered frequently in South Asia. Number 1. Oh, is this the first one? Just checking. Yes. Okay, here you go. Number 1, let's help poor women start new business with credit. Yes, this is actually the popular idea, but a yellow flag idea. Number 2, let's provide popular skills training and provide loans to help poor people start new businesses. Now skills added. Is it enough? Number 3, we provided entrepreneurship training to those young people. Now the banks and MFIs should extend the loans. Can they? Number 4, poor people cannot start a new business without access to a loan to buy a new machine or rent a nice looking shop. Really. Number 5. Let's create a community revolving fund. Here you go. And don't forget there is a microfinance market out there. Number 6. Let's create savings and credit groups under my project. Aha. And protects them from exploitative microfinance institutions. Well, Africa is not the only case. 7. Organizing savings and credit groups is a great way to mobilize people for the participatory planning of community development. Is that the purpose? Number 8. Why don't we provide grant instead of loans? Okay, forget about microfinance. Number 9. Let's use microfinance institutions to distribute grant or subsidized loan to disaster-stricken communities. Lots of technical questions on this. Number 10. Microenterprises will solve all the problems of poverty. I wish so. Please don't worry if you do not agree 100% on each and every point. I made it rather controversial. Okay? After all, they are not the red cards. They are all tricky questions though. So whenever you see these symptoms, you may want to discuss with the right experts. Yellow is just a warning sign. If you don't watch, you may get into an accident. That's what I mean. Okay, now the polling time. I have a question for you. Do you also see or hear any of these ideas, either with the ILO projects or projects of other organizations? Please answer by yes or no. You have 10 seconds to answer. Let's begin. It should be closing in a few seconds. Okay, wow. The result is 94% said yes, only 6% no. I'm glad to learn that most of you have heard the similar statements. It makes my talk easier. Okay, now let me raise the next question. Why yellow card ideas go unchecked? Of course, it is because the financial experts are not involved from day one of the design stage. Other colleagues already mentioned that. We know that. So why don't we do that? I listed 4 points here. I'm sure you can tell more reasons why it is not happening, but my points are as follows. 1, we are so used to work in a compartmentalized way, So how can we know someone else is preparing a project with financial component? Number 2, if we know that someone is preparing projects with finance component, can we actually intervene or influence the project design of someone else? If we are not invited especially. Number 3, how do we call it? Lack of humbleness of one's knowledge and expertise, or overconfidence that I can handle the financial question without the finance expert. Number 4, lack of institutional recognition that social or microfinance is a highly specialized area of expertise. I can hear someone is saying, we don't have enough funding to hire 10 different experts, so why don't we drop the social finance consultants and ask enterprise consultants to handle the financial issue? Don't worry, it's not so important. Then, even if we succeed to link up social finance experts with the project design team, there is still a remaining issue for the integrated project to work. What if other components are badly integrated? Sorry, not designed but integrated. because the issue is usually the link between finance component and other component. BDS, skills, child labor, social protection, gender, you name it. How can we make sure that all these pieces are put together correctly, and who will do it? So my final question is, what can we do? When we know already that the involvement of social finance experts is key to success, but we also know that it is often not happening or it happens too late. I don't want to be conclusive with my presentation, but would like to leave this question to the discussion later in this webinar. This is the end of my presentation. Back to you, Yusra. Hello, Yusra.
Okay, until...
Sorry. Yeah, you can hear
there
me.
you are.
No, now I'm back. Sorry. So I was thanking Hideki and all our panelists for the extremely insightful views and the nice results and the share of experience. And now we arrive to the question and answer part. And as I have seen that following the encouragement from Gustavo, you've been very active in reacting to the presentations and sending comments and questions. So Jasmine has been gathering them. So let's see how we can answer them in the more or less 15 minutes left before we close the webinar. So the first question is from Peter, and he was asking about, let me find the question in my...
I have it, I can take over if you want.
Okay, go ahead, Gustavo.
Okay, the question from Peter was what is the difference between policy advice and policy formulation, and also what is a product. So first of all, I apologize because perhaps I should have been more clear with the concepts, but also the scope of the presentation didn't allow me to go into the detail of all of this. So Peter, my answer would be that what is policy advice? And first, an acceleration is that this was a little bit arbitrary. When I decided if an intervention using social finance was policy advice or policy formulation, I had some guidelines to follow, but it was also a little bit subjective. So what I would claim was policy advice was when the technical cooperation included some activity aiming at suggesting the way to carry out social finance components. For example, to encourage a local economic development plan, to map existing microfinance institutions, to foster the access to credit. So more as a way of suggesting, as a way of how to do it. The difference with policy formulation is that I would claim that policy formulation is a step forward and involved technical cooperations in which the activities were directly related to the development of policies to foster the access to financial services. And here I can give a concrete example to leave this clear. In Iraq, this project I was mentioning before, there was a technical cooperation with activities aiming to an improved management of the governmental guaranteed microlending program. And this involved a synergy with the government for the sanction of new legislation on this regard. So it's a step forward and involves actually making policy. Last, what is a product? Well, product is the document that is attached to every active technical cooperation that is approved by PARDEV and the donors, and that you can access through IRIS if you have the right permits, and includes the description of the project. This involves the time frame, what the project is aiming at, the logical framework, and this involves, of course, objectives, outcomes, outputs, activities, and in some cases, indicators. And this is exactly in this document where I found many differences. Some projects were very, very detailed, and some products of other technical cooperations were quite limited.
Thank you, Gustavo. I just can see that by your experience, you are a compilation of a technical officer, VAR dev expert, and programming expert. Great. I hope that Peter had the answer. So we have another question from Merton, and I would turn to Hideki for it to answer because both of them are from the same technical area. So Merton is asking, most projects are associated to seed, but really I don't see much happening in finance. Is it just me? Do projects claim they do not, but they don't? Or is it that the activities are so marginal that it goes unnoticed? Hideki?
Okay. Yes, you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, first, I must say that South Asia is not necessarily, enterprise project rich area. I would say that probably you may get more feedback from Africa. Probably Judith could provide some insights. But having said that, in general, we have seen that involvement of social finance happens at the activities level mostly and less at the objective outcome level, etc. So things are not so visible when many projects are doing something. When it comes to activities, unless there isn't a major capacity building of financial institutions or microfinance institutions, simply something like entrepreneurship training happens, and then they connect to the locally based microfinance institutions, and that's it. So we don't really see it unless we really look into the quality and whether business is developing or failing, because this is actually a real challenge, right? Okay, maybe
Okay.
my answer should be like this.
Okay, thank you, Hideki. I don't know whether, Gustavo, you want to add
Yeah.
very quick comments?
Yeah, just a very quick comment on Merton's question. That I think is an interesting question because also reflects on the methodology of the inventory and also on the methodology of how we are writing our technical cooperations, all the units. So what the inventory is saying is that a lot of products in the case of SEED included social finance activities, but this is only at the programmatic level. It might be, and perhaps it is because of poor design, that at the end the social finance schemes are not carried out at all, and that's why we don't see it in practice. That is what my point in the presentation, that we need to carefully design the interventions and ideally use SFP expertise to do so that we can guarantee that the set of activities related with social finance will be finally implemented in the right way.
Thank you, Gustavo. So there's another question from Emanuela Pozan, who is working on a new IPEC project in Thailand, a 4-year project, and she's mentioning that they have a livelihood component, which is not yet designed because they are waiting for input. And her question is, what is a reasonable time span for social finance component in a TC project? Valérie, do you want to answer?
Yes, I can answer. Thank you for the question, Manu. Very relevant question, and I'm sure many other participants will be interested. You might have seen the project that I presented. We were contacted only 10 months before the end of the project, so it was like very challenging for us to implement well what we wanted to do. So the objective really is to building financial services that work for target groups. We want to be able to be able to see that the target group have access to financial services that are adapted to their needs. But what we want to see also is that these services are accessible not only in the frame of your project but also after. So we want the services to be sustainable. So it takes time to do that. You cannot come and offer services and go. So if we want the thing to be well done, we really want to start by doing an assessment at the beginning. And I know you're doing some baseline assessments in the frame of your project at the moment. So it's probably a good idea to already working on the mapping of financial institutions in your target provinces and see how you can develop the intervention. So if you have, I mean, you cannot do in 6 months, you cannot do in 1 year if you want to do it well. So if you have 4 years, I would say, and if you start now, you will have all the chances to do it well. Of course, not all projects are 4 years, so but the idea is that if you have only 6 months or 1 year, it will be very challenging to do it well. So I would say at least 2 years and maybe more to make sure the services are adapted and sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Valérie. There's another question from Laetitia in the Arab State region. She's asking, actually this question will be for Judith, it is all designed for you. I'm interested to know more about social finance for vulnerable groups because Laetitia is thinking about a new project that is currently being discussed to implement social finance with Iraqi refugees. So she is asking if we know more about ILO experience with implementing social finance with vulnerable refugee population. Judith?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Yusra. Yes. Actually, the ILO has been working with UNHCR already for several years because UNHCR had a similar question. They were wondering, what can we do? You know, UNHCR does a lot of relief work, but they also want to empower people to do income-generating activities, to take care of their own lives. And some refugees are also in the long-term situation where they are, you know, in a refugee. So this is an interesting question for them. So the social finance program has assisted UNHCR in this area, and also because of that, social finance program has built up a lot of information on how to do this. So we know a lot about working with vulnerable groups in general, but we also know a lot about working with refugees. And Yusra may be the best person to get additional information after this webinar, because there's all types of policies and tools and trainings that are being developed. So I think that's what I would recommend to you, to get in touch with Yusra for more specific follow-up.
Thank you, Judith. Thanks to all. So now I think I'll hand it over to Craig for a wrap-up. Thank you all for your questions. It was very lively, animated, interesting. So now, Craig, to you for a final word and a wrap-up.
Okay, thanks, Yusra. So the presentation will certainly be made available to everybody afterwards. I'm happy to share it with you. As you can tell from the discussion so far, Gustavo's angle has been on the project design aspect, and I think that's been a very valuable insights for us to understand some of the challenges in designing projects to include social finance effectively. I think our next step needs to be moving beyond the project design and really thinking about the implementation. So this is related to Merton's question about, you know, do they put it in the ProDoc but in fact not actually do it in practice. And I think what we need to be doing is following up with those departments and that have a high concentration of social finance components in their projects and try to better understand some of the challenges they're having on the implementation side and some of the successes that they're having so that we can, you know, develop better support systems. You know, the issue on our side is that social finance is a small program, only a handful of staff here in Geneva and a couple in the field who are available to provide these services. If there's 25% of the ILO's TC projects have social finance components, it's going to be difficult for us to effectively provide a valuable service. And so we need to be developing more streamlined methods of providing guidance, whether it's the highlights and briefs and various publications that we have, and hopefully we'll be able to make sure that that information is available as a first step, and then people have a better idea of what questions that they really need answered, and then we can provide them more specific responses. So with that, I think I want to close the webinar. I want to thank everybody for their participation. We had a good turnout and some good questions, and particularly I want to thank Gustavo for doing an excellent job of doing the analysis and preparing the results to share with everybody.
Thank you all. So there will be a survey that will pop up on your screens when you leave the webinar, so please take time to fill it in. Your answer will not only help us improve the webinar, but also help us better know and answer your needs in terms of social finance. I see, for example, that Naiz told us that he's happy to know that there's that social finance is there about making finance work for the poor. So we are happy to be there for you, then to continue and to help you better implement your social finance components. Thank you for all, and have a nice afternoon, evening, morning. Bye.